This video is sponsored by Squarespace. What's up everyone, Sara Dietschy, a Rhymes with Peachy here. Today we are talking all things Sony cameras. I just got back from camera camp with the release of the new Sony ZV-E10 II. Their names are kind of bad. And you know, it was so fun to catch up with everyone, and some people got to meet Baby girl's first swag bag. It's a little Sony Alpha camera. Another little camera toy. Oh my gosh. But as they were announcing this camera, I realized, okay, you know, this camera is not for me, and that's okay that it's not for me. And it might not be for you either. You who watches a ton of camera videos and you scour the web for answers for hours and hours. This new camera is really for someone who really wants to dip their toes in the waters of cameras with interchangeable lenses. How exciting. A lot of times they're upgrading from a phone, right? As they were announcing things, I realized that some of the people that were there that were TikTokers or more vertical social content type people. I dabble in the vertical, but sometimes when you talk to the TikTokers, you know, makes you feel a little old. Anyways, they were kind of oohing and awing at these ZV features that we've actually seen before, but to them, it's new. So a camera that's lightweight and it shoots 4K 10-bit, just the image is just going to be much better than your phone, and it comes in white. A camera like that is exciting for those types of people. And so I do kind of want to talk about that camera a little bit. But guys, look, I updated my Sony chart, okay? I've done this once before, a year and a half ago, because I think Sony has so many cameras and it's getting confusing for me, so I can only imagine how it is for you. And if you're looking to buy a camera in the next year, I'm hoping that you can leave this video with an answer, hopefully. This hurt my brain to make, so let's talk through it. Okay, so let's start with the ZV cameras. These are the only cameras in Sony's lineup that come in white. Ooh, pretty. You know, people who are just looking for a camera on Amazon or BestBuy.com, they see the white option. The ZV cameras skew a little bit younger, you know, probably not as professional. This is where you're getting your start, right? So when I say full frame, APS-C, and small sensor, this is just the sensor type, right? This is the sensor in a camera. This one right here is a full frame sensor. APS-C is a little bit smaller, and the smaller sensors are a great deal amount smaller. The sensor type can affect a lot of things because a full frame sensor is bigger. The cameras are typically going to be a little bit bigger, but the smaller the sensor, the smaller the camera can be. However, a full frame sensor compared to maybe a small sensor, it's going to be easier to get things like depth of field. That is the blur that you see in between me and my background back here, right? So by sensor size, you know, we have type over here, and then we have a point and shoot, which is gonna be a much smaller camera, like an RX100 or the Fujifilm X100V. We're not talking Fuji today, so you know. So we have our different kind of point and shoots. We have hybrid photo, hybrid video. That means these cameras can do both really well, photo and video, but the priority is photo, the priority is video. And then we have just the fully fledged, hey, this camera is for photography, this camera is for video. Obviously they do the other ones, but you know, it just prioritizes that. And then we have the GOAT that we're not gonna talk about really at all in this video, but the Sony A1 is over $6,000 and kind of just does it all and is the GOAT of Sony cameras. So let's start with the ZV series, given the fact that the ZV-E10 II just released. So I put the ZV-E10 II in the hybrid video category for APS-C. It is really a video first, but I also got some really great photos. This camera does have the same sensor as the A6700 and the FX30. A6700 I have at the hybrid photo because, well, it has an EVF and has other things that we're going to talk about later. And then the FX line is of course video first. It's, you know, their cinematic line from the FX30 to FX3 to FX6, what I'm shooting with now. A lot of people were comparing this new ZV camera to the FX30. Oh, it's a way cheaper option in comparison. Hey, you might deal with some overheating with the ZV-E10 II, but hey, it's a great deal in context with the FX30. Now, I don't think that's the best comparison. I think it's more comparable to the A6700. And the 6700 is only a few $100s more, and hopefully I can kind of make the argument that the A6700 is just so much more worth the money. So why I think ZV cameras are often disappointing to camera people is because in the Sony line, they are the last to really get hardware updates because they're reusing the sensor that we've seen in the FX30 and the 6700, right? So they get kind of the last hardware updates. However, this is where Sony kind of experiments with their cool software. So most of the ZV cameras have really cool software that isn't in the more professional A7 line. So you have the softening of the skin, which is really nice. Hey, on those days where I'm not feeling too hot, it is nice to have that just built into the camera because those features on Zoom and the other apps sometimes just fail miserably. So you have product showcase where, hey, no matter where you put a product in the shot, it's going to focus on that product. So you have background defocus. Again, this is for the beginners that might not know, hey, if I lower my f-stop, I'll get more of a blurry background. Instead, they can just press the background defocus button. You have the 3-capsule microphone, which is great for vlogging. You don't necessarily have to put an external mic on the top of the camera. This makes the ZV line more portable, right? You have tele record lights, you have cinematic vlog setting, you have a self timer for video. Most of them have breathing compensation for lenses, and then the USB-C output, you can stream from that. So you can plug it directly into your camera and use it for Zoom. So all of those features are consistent with the ZV line. And so cool software features, slightly outdated hardware, plus like a cheaper plastic body equals a more affordable price. Okay, to dive in deeper as to why the 6700 might be better for you, we have to talk a little bit more about the ZV-E10 II, which just released. So upgrades from the ZV-E10 I is you have 4K 10-bit up to 60 frames per second. You have vertical UI when you tilt the camera, great for the TikTokers, right? It is extremely lightweight, even though they upgraded to the bigger battery. So yay, it has better battery life. It's still extremely light, so it's going to be extremely portable. You have the new menus, you have the 3-capsule mic, right? So hey, let's test the microphone. Here's a test for the audio. So there is not a microphone on the top of this ZV-E10 II. It's just the microphone in auto. You can change it to front or back or all directions. And so we're in auto right now. Obviously the other camera is gonna sound better because I have this giant microphone on it, but let's take that microphone off so you can kind of hear the difference with my tiny microphones in the A7S III that aren't very good. A7S III audio just with the internal microphone. Here's a test for the audio. So there is not a microphone on the top. And then of course, because it is APS-C, you have Sony's smaller lenses so that, you know, keeps it more portable. But it's interesting, already using, you know, this lens 16 to 50, because it's an APS-C lens. Remember, you have to take that 16 millimeters and times it by like 1.5. And so it's actually not as wide as I would like it, especially when using the active image stabilization. So I actually have the 11 millimeter lens, so I'm excited to throw this on. And that's the benefit of using an APS-C camera. Yeah, baby. Is you can use the smaller lenses. Okay, I'm gonna switch to the 11 mil. Here we go. Boom, 11 mil, 1.8. So we have a little bit more depth of field in the background, but more importantly, it is wider. 11 millimeters in your face.
How does it look? How are my pores?
11, let's see what APS-C equivalent that would be. So is it equivalent to a 16 mil?
So you need math to use this camera? How's it look? How
Looks
are my
great.
pupils?
Also, the latest full frame lenses are so good. I basically had the new 24 to 50 f2.8 lens on this camera for most of Sony Camera Camp, and I thought that focal length was so silly, but it ended up being one of my favorite lenses that I use. I feel like I'm already going so into the weeds. I really hope I'm not losing you already. So this new 26 megapixel sensor, you know, it has faster readout speeds than the ZV-E10, but it does not have a mechanical shutter, which isn't the best for rolling shutter when capturing fast motion, or you can get banding under artificial lights. Now, this leads us to the cons. So the Mark II version of this camera only has an electronic shutter. The first one had a mechanical shutter, and this one was $300 cheaper. Now, everyone knows that this camera had pretty bad rolling shutter whenever you're filming fast motion, so it's not like that solved that problem, but it's just very interesting. I'm not the biggest fan of the $300 price hike on this Mark II. But if something like flash photography is big for you, having a mechanical shutter is always going to be better. So you might get some of those issues with banding with artificial lights, etc., with the electronic shutter of the Mark II. This is confusing people. A lot of people are saying that the ZV-E10 II has IBIS, but that is in-body image stabilization. That is only something that some of the more expensive cameras has, and the A6700 does have IBIS. The E10 II only has electronic stabilization, and I did test it out, and it's just, you know, it's fine, but it's gonna be a little bit more jello-y than a proper IBIS. Now, they do have a new kit lens. You get a good deal on it when you buy it with the camera together, and it's fine. Like, kit lenses are never amazing, and if you are upgrading from a phone and this is your first interchangeable lens system, I would frankly always recommend a better lens. Sony has so many incredible lenses now. Last few things about this camera. It does not oddly have the auto framing like the 6700 does, as well as the ZV-E10. And a lot of people are saying, oh, hey, this is great for a B cam, but I think some people have already shared that, hey, it's not the best when it comes to overheating. And when I think of a B camera, I think of a camera that sits off on the side during an interview or something like that, where you're filming for at least 30 minutes at a time. And if you're not in perfect weather conditions, you know, you might have some overheating issues. So if you're searching for a B cam, or if you're nervous about overheating, the FX30 is going to be your perfect APS-C option for that scenario, because it has fans. It is just like never gonna overheat. All you have to worry about is basically the battery. So you have that new ZV-E10 II coming in at $998, but this 6700 coming in at $1,398. And I believe earlier, I think I said $300 more, so it is $400 more, which I understand, again, can be a stretch for people, but a few things that I think makes this more worth it than the E10 II. Okay, so you have a mechanical shutter, which again is going to be much better for photos, but you're going to experience also less rolling shutter. It's going to be better for flash photography, all the things I talked about earlier. You have the same 4K 10-bit video, which again, if you're not well versed in video, 10-bit video is just so much better than 8-bit video. The quality, low light, just everything about it is so much better. But in the 6700, you have it up to 120 frames per second in 4K. You only have it up to 60 frames per second in the ZV-E10 II. And then you also have in-body image stabilization, which really is better than the electronic stabilization. And then also you have an EVF, which I'm a video first person, but even I use EVFs all the time. That's often why I'll choose the A7S III over the FX30 if I'm just out and about shooting, because if you're in sunny conditions, seeing through an EVF is just so extremely helpful. The A6700 doesn't come in white, so that might be a problem for some, but at $400 more, I think you're getting so much more value here than here. If you just want a nice camera for a really nice zoom setup and you get a decent lens, I think going with the original ZV-E10 at $699 is actually really great. If that camera is just gonna sit behind your computer, you get a nice lens with f2.8 aperture, save the money on the camera here, get a decent lens, and if you just plug it in via USB-C, you're gonna just have that constant power, and you're not gonna encounter any overheating issues with that camera if you're not recording at the same time as you are streaming or zooming. If you want to record at the same time, I would highly recommend just doing 1080. You will have zero issues with that, and I promise upscaling that 1080 image to 4K, if it's for a podcast or something like that, it's still going to look much better than what a default webcam zoom setup would look like. If you're video first, you already have a nice full frame camera for your A cam and you're looking for that B cam, I would recommend the FX30. You still have a lot of those great video features that are specific to the FX line, and you can also buy the XLR handle with it, but you can get the FX30 body for only $1598, and I still think that's pretty good value. Oh, you know what else that you guys should check out? Squarespace. You guys know I've been using Squarespace for my personal website, saradietschy.com, for what, 7 years now, 8 years now. I've been able to sell Peachy merch. I've been able to beautifully display my video work for clients as a portfolio. But why it's so fun to talk about Squarespace is they come out with new features, I swear, every month, And so I never run out of things to talk about. Like, did you know that you can now do client invoicing from your Squarespace website? So if you're a photographer and you work with a lot of clients, not only can you build a beautiful portfolio using Squarespace, you can also just simplify your entire process and have your client handle the entire process on your website with their, I'm looking at it now, their beautiful client invoicing system, which is really cool because you can keep a very consistent brand, you know, with everything. You don't have to send them to QuickBooks or whatever. You can also schedule appointments directly on your Squarespace website, say if you're a hair salon or something like that. They also have courses that you can build right in to your website. You don't have to send customers to a random third party, right? You can keep all of your branding consistent, all under the umbrella of, you know, sarad or whatever your website is. And something they just released is called Design Intelligence. And this is them saying, hey, we get it. People are using AI for everything and we're gonna incorporate it into Squarespace. And they have a really cool example on their website of something coming soon. It's not out yet, but it's essentially where just with text, you tell Squarespace exactly what you are going to be selling on your website, what is your style, what's the vibe that you want to achieve, and Squarespace essentially just creates the website for you, and then you can go in and like tweak things, which is just mind-blowing, right? To be able to go from 0 to 1 that quickly is just, it's just kind of mind-blowing. We are kind of living in the future. So if you want to test it out, go to squarespace.com for a free trial. But if you want to get started today, go to squarespace.com/saradietschy, that's me, for 10% off your first purchase of a domain or website. Okay, so we get to move on to my favorite part, which is full frame cameras. I am a full frame snob. When I put on a 35mm lens on my camera, I want it to be truly 35. I don't want to have to, you know, do the 1.5 times in my head. I've always vibed the best with the full frame form factor from Sony, and they just have so many options, as you can tell. And then their full frame lenses are just incredible. So I have always kind of stayed in the full frame lane. But if you'll allow me, let me break it down a little bit. A common theme that Sony does is they take one sensor, they put it in their flagship camera, and then slowly, you know, years after, they sprinkle it in to other cameras. So that's what happened over here. You know, we started with the A6700 and the FX30. Those have the same sensors. They sprinkled it down to the ZV line. These all have the same sensor, the same 26 megapixel APS-C sensor. The same is for full frame. You're gonna see that theme a lot. So the A7S III, which is just one of the GOATs, you know, it's a Sony camera that I have always used, whether it was the A7S II or the A7S III. This guy came out in 2020. This 12 megapixel sensor that is really good in low light. S stands for sensitivity, and I put it in hybrid video because yes, it is a low light video beast, but it also takes amazing photos as well. This same sensor is the same sensor that's in the FX3 and the same sensor that is in the ZV-E10. It started here in 2020 and then it came to the FX3, but then the FX3 adds more video centric features, right? So this is the video first option, and then they sprinkled it down to the ZV line, and so this is the full frame point and shoot option. So if you want a full frame camera that is ultra portable, it has that special microphone on it to where, you know, you don't really need a microphone on top. That is what the ZV-E10 will get you. That's what I want to kind of focus on right now, is the A7S III versus the ZV-E10. Because for the APS-C cameras, I think the 6700 is where kind of the most value is, the most bang for your buck. The ZV-E10 is actually where I think the most value is for full frame cameras if you're kind of just getting into it. Even though it's a camera I would not use, I think for the price, it's extremely powerful. So first, let's talk about what you lose with the ZV-E10 versus the A7S III. So you lose the mechanical shutter, so it only has an electronic shutter. There's no viewfinder, only one SD card slot. You have less custom buttons, and of course, it has more of a plasticky body, which we see in all ZV cameras. When you hold like an A7S III versus a ZV-E10, it's lighter, but it does feel cheaper. And something interesting that I learned at Camera Camp from an engineer that I didn't even think of before is the overall image actually suffers a little bit when the body of the camera isn't as durable, when it's not as thick. So the more insulated a sensor is, the better the image is going to be. So actual physical noise can affect an image, which I just thought that was fascinating. A7S III also is going to be better with overheating, something to think about because of the body. But the ZV-E10 actually has things that the A7S III doesn't have. So the ZV-E10 has the ability to do custom LUTs. Now this is something people expected in the firmware update for the A7S III, and they did not get it. Another thing that I learned from a Sony engineer there is he says, oh, people always say, oh, just update the firmware, update the firmware. Why that actually isn't as easy as people think is the chips in these cameras are already running at like max capacity when they ship it out to customers. So in order to add something in the camera, they actually have to remove things. My thinking is, oh, for some reason, custom LUT support was just too much to add in the upgrade, but then they did add several things. So I'm wondering what was the discussion, the pros and cons of adding the other things versus custom LUTs. But anyways, the point is the ZV-E10 has that feature and the A7S III does not. I will say I have been able to live without it in my A7S III. Of course, because the FX3 is more video focused, the FX3 does have that LUT support, but something you can do with the A7S III is you can turn on what is called gamma assist. So this is going to add back that contrast and saturation in your image on your camera. So it's going to look more like the image is going to look in your editor when you apply that LUT in post. Okay. Things that are, again, in the ZV-E10, but not in the A7S III. You have that 3-capsule microphone. Like I mentioned before, the audio is going to be much better without a microphone here, opposed to the A7S III. And it also has that new AI processing chip that enables the auto cropping feature and the multiple face recognition. So you actually have more autofocus features in the ZV-E10 as well. And then both of them do 4K 120 frames per second 10-bit, which is like a very important video feature for many video people. And yeah, that's the ZV-E10 versus the A7S III. So even though it's like $1,400 more affordable, as you can tell, if you don't need this camera to be running for like an hour at a time at, you know, a wedding or an interview outside where you don't have to worry about overheating, this camera is so good for the price that you can get it. ZV-E10. I have a video on this. I'll put it in the description below if you want to check it out. When mentioning things like, oh, the ZV-E10 has features that the A7S III doesn't have, some people get angry. And this is why I think some people get angry at Sony is, hey, why are you putting more professional features in these cheaper cameras, but then the A7S III doesn't get it, right? Okay, maybe this is a reason to get annoyed by Sony, but I think this is what makes Sony Sony. They're not going to protect these features behind a more expensive professional camera. I think this is what's actually really great about Sony is they're like, well, the ZV-E10 is a newer camera. The A7S III came out in 2020. This came out years later. Don't you think that this newer camera needs these newer features? So I think you just need to keep in mind that, hey, the A7S III, it's getting old. We're probably going to see a new one in the next year, year and a half. And so when the new one comes out and it has all of these features and more, no one's going to remember, right? But isn't it going to be a good thing that the ZV-E10 doesn't feel extremely outdated because it doesn't have those features, right? Did that sentence make sense? Anyways, I prefer a camera manufacturer to cram in as many of the new features as possible in new cameras because, yeah, that's just going to stand the test of time better, you know? Okay, speaking of cameras that are getting slightly outdated, let's talk about the A7 IV. This is another GOAT. The A7 III was an iconic camera, but when the A7 IV came out with updated color science and a lot of the updated video features, but it also had a 30 megapixel sensor, so it's great for photography. People just love this camera. It's a great camera still for $24.98, but something to consider is there's probably gonna be a new one in like 2 years, that maybe a year and a half, I don't know. But again, if you need a camera today, you need a camera today, and there's so many good options, and it's probably a really great time to buy some of these cameras used, right? So a 33 megapixel full frame GOAT. If you need more megapixels, that's where I would recommend the A7R5. These are in the hybrid photo category because I would say the A7R5 is definitely photo first. Ironically, it's one of the few Sony cameras that can shoot in 8K 24 frames per second video. But again, you have the the R stands for resolution, so you have the high resolution 62 megapixel, 61 megapixel sensor. So if cropping in is more of an important thing for you, I would definitely recommend the R over just the A7 IV. But yeah, the A7 IV is still kind of just the ultimate full frame hybrid camera. It doesn't have 4K 120 frames per second video recording like the A7S III, but it does have 4K at 60 frames per second. And of course, it's the upgraded 10-bit versus 8-bit. Okay, so say you're like, hey, that sounds nice, but maybe this body is just a little bit too big for you. It's a little bit too professional. You don't need the 2 SD card slots. You don't need the full-size HDMI port. And also you want something that's a little bit more affordable, then, well, do I have the camera for you? This is where the A7C II comes into play. This is like the point and shoot version of the A7 IV. So it only has 1 SD card slot, has a mini HDMI, and little physical things is it's missing this thumb pad that I am obsessed with. I use it so much. I use it for setting autofocus points, but also just selecting things on the menu. Not having this here on the FX3 actually bothers me so much. I miss it so much. They put it on the top, which honestly, I really don't understand at all. But the A7C II doesn't have this joystick because it is a smaller body, but again, it's compact. That's what that C stands for. You're also going to have a smaller viewfinder. So if taking photos and taking video with a viewfinder is important, it's just the quality of the viewfinder is just not going to be the same. You're going to have to focus more on using it. Whereas when you this is just natural, you know, it's big and bright and good. You don't really have to think of it as much. When we start getting into these smaller body full frame cameras, something to be cognizant of again is overheating. But what's interesting again is the A7C II is the cheaper camera compared to the A7 IV, but it actually has some features that the A7 IV does not because it came out, you know, 2 years later. So because this is newer, it does have support for user LUTs, right? And it has the same improved AI autofocus from the A7R5, which is very impressive, and it does have the AI auto framing feature. So we're seeing similar themes, I think, you know, in between the bigger body versus smaller body, but I think the one real thing you have to think about is this a camera that you're going to be taking to jobs that you have clients for? They're going to see, you know, a small camera as a sign of weakness. I know that seems absurd, but showing up to set with a bigger camera, and of course you can always rig it out more. Like the FX30, you can rig out as much as the FX3, right? So with those cameras, it's not that big of a difference. But say an A7C II versus the look of an A7 IV, right, is going to be different. So that is something to consider if you're showing up on set. But if you're filming for your own YouTube channel or your own podcast, or you just want a killer camera for your vacations and to record life and family photos, then 100% go with a smaller body that's cheaper, that sometimes has more features, and because it's smaller, maybe you're just gonna take it out and use it more because it doesn't feel as big of a deal. Okay, we are rounding the corner here. We got the cat in the office to help us out, and he's just meowing so loud. I swear he's louder than the baby most times. The A7R5. So this was released December 2022, and I would say is kind of like the Sony full frame flagship right now. It's a very impressive camera. I know the ultimate flagship is the Sony A1, but this camera really is amazing. So the R stands for resolution. Kitty, I'm filming a video right now. Oh my gosh. So the R stands for resolution. You have a 61 megapixel sensor. I used to think resolution doesn't matter that much until I got a Leica Q2. And when I started kind of documenting just life on that camera, and I had the 42 or 47 megapixels to play with, and I started to realize, oh, how much it affects your ability to just crop into an image and really reframe the image in post. That's when I was like, oh, resolution is actually incredible. And that's what you're gonna get with this 61 megapixel sensor. So this is like the photographer's camera, right? So if you're a professional wedding photographer or you do portraits, I would say this is the one to get. Because it's a photo first camera, it doesn't shoot 4K 120 frames per second like the A7S III or the FX3 does, but it does shoot, like I said earlier, 8K at 24 frames per second, which is interesting. interesting. If you are primarily video, I would 100% recommend going with, again, the FX3 or the A7 IV. Or, I mean, again, I love my A7S III, but that's because I've had it since the get, right? I don't know if I would recommend that right now, just because I know we're like a year away from an update, probably. But if you're video first, like the FX3 is just, it's fantastic. But I like the EVF, so you know. Find the A7S III or the A7 IV used. There you go. I can live with that. The A7R5 also has a new type of swivel display. And so this can be found in other cameras like Fujifilm. I think Nikon has one. But it's the first of a Sony camera where it's like a 4-axis multi-angle monitor. So not only can you like flip it out like that, but it also articulates down or up without having to flip it out, which is really helpful for photographers. I would say the most impressive part about this camera is the new AI processing chip. So it helps with image stabilization, but it also helps tremendously with autofocus. And one of my favorite autofocus features that Sony does is face recognition. So you can literally register, say, if you're a wedding photographer, like the bride's face at a wedding. And even if a ton of people walk in front of the shot, it will stay focused just on the bride's face, which is epic. Now, this feature is also in the A7C II, but the A7R5 is the only Sony camera where this feature also works in video, not just photos. That's very cool, and I cannot wait to see that feature come down to the other cameras. And if we go up here, the A7CR, compact and the resolution, is basically a miniature version of the A7R5, which we just talked about. So it's $1,000 less, and you get the same sensor of the A7R5 and a lot of the same features, but a few trade-offs. Some of the same trade-offs of the A7SC, no full-size HDMI, only one SD card slot, no joystick, etc., right? But the image stabilization on the A7CR isn't as good. It shoots 8 frames per second, continuous shooting instead of 10 frames per second. It does not shoot that 8K video. And then of course you're losing that 4-axis articulating screen. And then also it just has the, you know, crappier, smaller EVF. And also a reminder, if you're putting the big like G Master full frame lenses on the A7CR, it's gonna look big regardless. If you watched the previous video of mine, I was so enticed by this camera and I almost bought it. But then I was just like, I have so many other Sony cameras that aren't really that much bigger, and some of the sacrifices that I would be giving up, I feel like just wasn't worth it when it comes to buying like a new, you know, $3,000 camera. So I held off, but then I had just bought the new 16 to 25 lens, which is on this camera right now, and that kind of helped me with my gas problem. Throwing that small lens on my A7S III makes it more mobile, kind of more fun to shoot with. So buying a new lens kind of helped me not buy a new camera. Okay, so yeah, well, okay, so the A9 III, so that's like, if you're a wildlife photographer, a sports photographer, you're going to go with that camera. I feel like, you know, you're not the person who's gonna watch this video for advice. You already know that you need this camera because it shoots a whopping 120 frames per second continuous shooting in photo mode, which is just crazy. The biggest standout with the A9 III is that it is the first mirrorless camera that has a full frame global shutter. So you have a nearly instantaneous readout, so you won't get any of the rolling shutter issues that you sometimes might face with, you know, a fast moving object, which is obviously very important if you're shooting like fast sports people or fast cars or something. So that was a really cool update to see from Sony. And yeah, obviously you can take a screenshot of this. I'll post a picture of this on my Twitter if you want to like look at the other stuff. But you know, hybrid photo, RX100 5 and the RX107 was so good with that. These are such still good vlogging cameras. I actually still prefer my RX105 over the ZV-E10 II. I just could not gel with this camera for reasons that I talked about in a previous video. But this camera is still, this is, okay, like GOAT status is RX100, A7S III, A7R5, and potentially the FX3. Amazing value, ZV-E1, 6700. I would really not recommend the ZV-1F, just not at all. I don't like that camera. If you need to elevate your webcam game, literally just use your iPhone or go with like a ZV-E10 or something like that, or even the ZV-E10 II. I would allow you to do that. It's just so much more versatile than this camera is. And then I think there's a really interesting opportunity for Sony right here. with this video first small sensor camera, I feel like they could do something really interesting to be a competitor to the DJI Osmo Pocket that people are obsessed with right now. I feel like a miniature gimbal camera from Sony would be so cool. Sony, make that please. Okay, how long was this video? Was it like 45 minutes? Hopefully more towards 30. There's so many Sony cameras, and so it's very overwhelming. I hope this helped a little bit. If you still have questions, you can let me know in the comments down below and I'll try to respond to you guys. But listen, with the release of all of these new APS-C and ZV cameras, I think we're gonna start seeing a lot of the full frame options get upgrades in the next 2 years, which is more exciting for me because I'm a full frame girly. I'm just full frame or bust, you know? So it'll be interesting to see what full frame cameras get the like ZV vlogging features, because I would love to have like the smooth skin feature on like a professional Sony camera, even though they might keep it for the ZV line, which would be fine, but I'm just throwing that out there. And then, you know, I feel like we are ready to see some truly next generation epic upgrades from Sony. I think Sony has been in maintenance mode the past few years, which is fine because they're still ahead of a lot of manufacturers by just doing that. But you know, in order for Sony to maintain that kind of like GOAT status of putting in crazy features into, you know, affordable, professional, compact cameras, I think we need to see some of these big upgrades. What they did with the new Sony a7R5 was great with the 8K and AI focusing features, so that was a good start. But with these video first cameras, I would love to see open gate recording. I would love to see internal 32-bit audio recording. Maybe a detachable EVF for the FX line. That would be incredible. I want all the things, okay? So yeah, that's something exciting to kind of look forward to, right? And again, some of these cameras, A7 IV, A7S III, you can get some killer used deals. Remember, you can buy cameras used, right? But if you want to check out any of these cameras, I will put my affiliate links down in the description below, where if you buy one of these cameras using my link, I get a little bit of an affiliate revenue from it. So it helps out this channel. Sony now sells their cameras directly on their website. So I'll put those links as well. I'll also put B&H, Amazon, wherever you like to shop. But yeah, I love dorking out about cameras and stuff. I know this video won't be for everyone, but hopefully it helped you. And yeah, let me know if you like this video. Hit that subscribe button down below for new videos every single week. Make sure to check out my Squarespace link for 10% off your first purchase of a domain or website. I don't know why I went Southern, but yeah, stay peachy. Okay, bye.